So, I got into D&D right around when 3.5 started taking over from 3rd edition. And for people who weren't around back then, role playing was a different scene then. Not only was it more underground than it was right now, but 3rd edition and from what I hear, earlier editions of D&D were a lot more complicated than 5th edition, which is the going standard right now. It was all a big numbers game, which, for a big numbers geek like me, is really fun because I would spend more time building characters than I would playing them. I was in a fairly small town, with D&D being a small subculture, even compared to today, and it was hard to find a group. But I could grab a book or two, or I was, I guess, the standard D&D player of that time with several hundreds of dollars of D&D books, and I would sit down and I could build a character. And one of the big differences with 3.5, which I think doesn't get enough attention, is that you didn't stick with one class. Multi-classing was not just common, but the standard, because starting at 5th level, they had a thing called prestige classes, which are kind of like archetypes today, that you would go into it and you'd get special abilities which built off of your base class. But the difference being that there were 3-level prestige classes, there were 5-level prestige classes. You would dip in and out of them, and they had different requirements, but there was no reason that you would just say do 10 levels of regular fighter followed by 10 levels of prestige class, which, by the way, was as long as any prestige class could be. It'd be very common that I'd go 2 levels of monk, which was my standard, followed by 4 levels of fighter, followed by 6 levels of this prestige class, 4 levels of that prestige class, just a single level of this one prestige class, which I've been working to get all of the prereqs met for the last 14 levels, and then finish off with another 5 levels of who knows what. You got really wonky builds like that, and you did this all because it was such a numbers game. The rules were complicated because you would just do everything you could to eke out slightly bigger numbers, until when you got around 10, 15, 20, you could have characters that were rolling with modifiers of plus 30 really pretty easily, compared to today, where with 5th edition, normally you only see a modifier of plus 10, maybe 15 or 20 when you're at level cap, level 20. But for a lot of D&D nerds, this was kind of the fun. It's a big numbers game, and you would work out to eke out every advantage. The issue was that 3.5 had a decent floor. That is, even if you had no clue how to play, if you just had a player's handbook and maybe a dungeon master's guide, you could build a decent character. You could have fun playing a level 20 rogue, or rather do a campaign from levels 1 through 20 with a single class, basic items, and it worked fine. And you never felt bad doing that until you met somebody who was playing, first of all, any spellcaster, because spellcasters in 3rd edition were much stronger than any martial class, and that got worse as you leveled up. Or anyone who owned a dozen splat books like I did, because each additional book had a million rules that you would just add on to the top, and you would get this many layered sandwich of different abilities from different books, which piled on top of each other, worked together, and would synergize off each other until you just got to insanity. And so the ability ceiling of a character in 3.5 was way up high. You can go online and you'll have to track them down a bit, because 3.5 has fallen out of favor as it's no longer being published. But you could very easily find characters who had literally infinite damage potential. And actually, there were certain specific examples where people bent the rules to be able to do that earlier and earlier. The most notable being Pun Pun the Kobold, who basically became god at, if I remember correctly, the original build was level 6, but then people pushed it down until he had basically infinite abilities of every sort at level 3. So you get weird things, and that caused a schism within the D&D community of power players versus role players. People who want to eke out every possible mechanic and abuse that, some would say, versus people who just want to tell a good story. And both sides have some merit, because anytime you choose an ability over another, very often you're doing at least a little bit of power playing. I don't know anybody who wants to play D&D or any other role-playing game for the sake of playing a completely vanilla, mundane character who doesn't have anything really to differentiate them from Mook number 3. So, in that way, yeah, everyone does at least a bit of power playing because you want to have abilities that are exceptional. You want to have cool things, and that's awesome. That's great. And I feel like, as someone who has been accused of a power player myself, the other side is that you like to do theoretical optimization. There's a certain fun in looking through these eldritch texts and picking apart the rules, and there's a reason that there's a term called rules lawyering, which sometimes is referred to fondly because you can build out these rules, and it's fun to see what the absolute theoretical possibilities are. But that doesn't mean that most of those players are actually planning to put it into a real game, because you have some sense of wanting to have a fun game for everybody. The issue started to come up when you had either players who didn't understand the limit of what was a reasonable power level, or when you had the mix of players who, you have a martial character who in 3.5 basically meant was bad. You had a person who used Tome of Battle, which was basically the way to fix martial characters, or just any standard spellcaster. And then that one guy who thought that it was balanced to roll up the best spellcaster they could without any so-called cheese. And between the power levels, you basically would have someone who was half as strong, a quarter as strong as the best person. And I've had groups where they legitimately don't care about power, where you put in a peasant next to a Grand Templar, and they have fun doing the dynamics between someone who's clearly a lot weaker but has their own niche to fill within the story. But as a dungeon master, that's an incredibly difficult game to run, and I understand why Wizards of the Coast decided to try to move away from that. So they made 4th edition, which I heard rumors of well before I played. I think everyone's heard the rumors. They basically tried to get the mass appeal of D&D to the lowest denominator. It felt very much like playing a video game more than actually role-playing, and everyone kind of felt the same after a while, because they basically gave everybody actions they could do every turn, basic spells and complicated spells, and what differentiated a ranger spell versus a wizard spell versus a fighter spell. There wasn't much. I did play a game of it. There's still optimization you can do. You can still have fun with the story because, I mean, hell, I've actually played role-playing games where there's literally 0 rules, where it's literally just story-based, and that's fun in its own way too. But at that point, you're just literally doing it for the story, and I would rather do that than have really basic rules that don't add anything to the experience for me. And then we have 5th edition, which is where we currently are, which is by far the most popular system today anyway, and it's popular with the big groups Matt Mercer, Arcadum, other people who have really brought up the idea to the more common appeal where people watch them play with other people online over Twitch and just make a very fun time of it that anybody can sit down and enjoy watching these characters interact. And the reason that 5th is so nice, of course, is that you still get very distinctive characters who are interesting, but Wizards of the Coast did a really good job of bringing the balance within a range for everybody. In my current campaign, I'm playing a 4th level sorcerer, 2nd level fighter, 1st level rogue, and the abilities kind of mesh together, but honestly, I would probably be stronger if I went single class for any of those, and yet I might be one of the stronger players in the current game I'm in, just because they've made the limit of power so much more narrow in the game. But I still feel completely different. I've never played a character who fits this archetype. I'm basically a spell-empowered rogue who has some martial proficiencies, and it's a completely unique character to anything I've played. And it feels unique playing it, but rules-wise, the rules are a little bit simpler. I love the advantage system where you just basically ask the DM, hey, I have these favors, I have these things in my favor. Can I get advantage on a roll, which lets me reroll twice, which lets me reroll my dice and take the better of numbers, or disadvantage because, I'm trying to fight in pouring rain on a muddy slope, and he says, no, you can't actively attack from this position. And that's such a nice way for DMs to be able to just look at things at a glance and not have to find detailed, specific numerical rules, which was kind of the bane of 3.5. The rules are a little bit simpler, but you still have good characterization. And the only sadness I have with 5th edition then is that I'm new to it. I've been in now one campaign. I might have done a one-shot once before. I can still use my understanding of rulebooks, and there is some carryover from 3.5, so I can build up characters, and I can help people, and I understand the gist of the rules as a seasoned role player, but I don't have the background knowledge I have with 3.5, where I've read a dozen books front to back, played in multiple campaigns. This is actually my first campaign, and so it's fun, it's interesting, but when I look at other character classes, I keep being surprised, like, oh, so that's what a paladin can do now, because I have my mental image from several editions ago. But anyway, that's just my experience with role-playing games. I've also played a little bit of World of Darkness from White Wolf Games, a smattering of even Besom, which is a really small game, particularly compared to 5th edition. And, a couple other little systems that weren't ever really made to be the marketing giant that D&D is. But I figured that I'd share that because I might be talking about D&D in the future, and it's good to know, where people come from. I might make a more succinct version of this later, and even potentially post it to my main channel, but right now, you guys get the rambly, story-driven talk about, hey, this is what D&D is to me, my background, and how it's going to relate to future videos, because I do have things I want to talk about. Things are in an exciting place, I think, both for me and the game in general. So, until next time, see ya.